All the rules that you learned in school do only one thing for you. They act as a monitor or an editor. Let's say you've learned a little French in school, you speak French as a low intermediate, you're about to have a conversation in French. The sentence you're about to say pops into your mind from your subconscious somewhere. Then just before you say it, you scan it, you look at it, you inspect it, you think of the rules you learned in school, and you make corrections. My original idea was this, and I thought it was good common sense. Acquisition gives us our fluency. Learning gives us our accuracy. It's an attractive idea. We have two components. They make two very different kinds of contributions. Clearly, we want both. We want language students to speak easily and fluently, but we also want the grammar to be there. So what I thought then is what we need is a balanced program. 2 days a week acquisition, 2 days a week learning. 2 days a week conversation, 2 days a week grammar. Now, that sounds very fair. The truth must be somewhere in the middle. Unfortunately, it's wrong. In fact, it's all wrong. What the research has been telling me for the last 10 plus years, the important role is with acquisition. Acquisition gives us fluency and accuracy. For the analytic thinking, grammar-loving adult, it's at least 95% acquisition, possibly more. For the child, it's 100%. And I'd also like to admit this to you. No one was more disappointed to discover this than me. My graduate work was in grammar. My PhD is in grammar. Like many language teachers today, I love grammar. The problem is that that's not how language acquisition happens. Language acquisition does not happen by learning grammar rules, by memorizing vocabulary lists. If acquisition is more important than learning, we must ask how it happens. How do we help people acquire language? If acquisition is more important than learning, that's what we want to have happen in our classrooms. When people speak to us in another language and we understand what they say, or we read something in another language and we understand the message, language acquisition will take place. In fact, it's an amazing thing. Language acquisition takes place necessarily. It's unavoidable. You can't help it. It happens subconsciously, automatically, and inevitably. If you give adults comprehensible input, if they understand the messages in a good language class, after a week or two, 10, 15 hours on the average, my experience has been that talking simply comes. It emerges on its own. We have in language classes the principle of grammatical sequencing. We're all familiar with this. For example, in our first week of language class, everything is in the present tense. We can only talk about objects in the room, what we're doing at this time, at this moment in class. Suddenly, at the end of the first month, we become obsessed with the past. We can only talk about last week and last year. Third month, you can only talk about the future. What will you do when you finish school, etc. We call this grammatical sequencing, and its goal is to aid in the acquisition of grammar. The theory says it has exactly the opposite impact. If we give people comprehensible input, and we give them a lot of it, grammatical sequencing is not only not necessary, it's probably harmful. Let me repeat that a major goal of language class is not just to bring about grammatical fluency in students, it's also to get the maximum level of grammatical accuracy. My position is that the way to do this is to give students a great deal of comprehensible input that will produce both fluency and accuracy. If enough input is present, if there's a rich source of comprehensible input, all the rules that the students are ready to acquire, examples of all these rules will be there in the input. Probably the worst problem, though, with the grammatical syllabus is that it's boring. It's very hard to present messages that are interesting and comprehensible to people when our hidden agenda is the relative clause or any other rule. What we're now saying is if we give people messages that are interesting and comprehensible, grammar to a large extent takes care of itself. And as most of us who've taught language know, this is easily difficult enough. There are two major difficulties in acceptance. One is our students, the second is us. Our students expect grammar. Our students expect vocabulary lists. Our students expect exercises. And very often, when we don't provide a great deal of grammar, they think it's a sign of professional incompetence on our part. I can think of a couple of solutions to this. First of all, I'd like to go back on what I've said in a couple of my previous works. I recommended a little tongue-in-cheek that we engage in deception. We teach our students in the target language, but we teach them grammar, teach them vocabulary, give them what they want. And regardless of their personal philosophy of language acquisition, they will acquire because they're getting comprehensible input, because it's being done in the second language.